Good evening, friends, and welcome to Bedtime Biographies, where history's most remarkable lives become our companions as we drift towards sleep. If stories like these bring you comfort, please subscribe and let us know in the comments which historical figure you'd like to explore next. A cramped boarding house, April 15th, 1865. Dawn breaks gray over Washington. In a narrow room across from Ford's Theater, surrounded by doctors and cabinet members who have kept vigil through the darkest hours, Abraham Lincoln draws his final breath. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton speaks into the silence. Now he belongs to the ages. But how? How did a barefoot boy from a dirt-floor Kentucky cabin, a child who learned to read by flickering firelight, who split fence rails in the Indiana wilderness, who knew the ache of hunger and the weight of melancholy, become the man who held a shattering nation together? How did he find the words that still echo through time? How did he transform a war to save the Union into a war for human freedom? This is the bedtime biography of Abraham Lincoln. Chapter 1. The Cabin in the Clearing, February 12, 1809. A Sunday morning, bitterly cold. In Hardin County, Kentucky, 3 miles south of Hodgenville, Nancy Hanks Lincoln lies in labor in a one-room log cabin. The cabin measures perhaps 18 feet across. The floor is packed dirt, a single window, no glass. The door hangs on leather hinges. Outside, the bare trees of Sinking Spring Farm stand skeletal against a winter sky. Thomas Lincoln paces near the fire. He is a sturdy man, illiterate but skilled with his hands, a farmer, a carpenter, descended from English weavers who came to Massachusetts 2 centuries before. He has paid $200 for 300 acres here, though the land titles in Kentucky are hopelessly tangled, disputed, a maze of overlapping claims that will haunt him for years. Nancy cries out. The midwife moves quickly. And then, the sound that changes everything, a newborn's wail piercing the February cold. Abraham Lincoln has entered the world. They name him after his grandfather, the first Abraham Lincoln, a captain who moved the family from Virginia to Kentucky and was killed by Native Americans in 1786, shot down while planting corn, his children watching. Thomas, then just 8 years old, saw his father die. The memory never left him. Now he gives his father's name to his second child, born in this crude cabin on land that may not even be his. The baby is impossibly small in this impossibly large wilderness. His sister Sarah, born 2 years earlier, peers at him with curiosity. Their older brother Thomas died in infancy. This boy, this Abraham, will have to survive. The family lives here at Sinking Spring for just 2 more years. The farm sits in a beautiful hollow, a limestone cave nearby, with a spring that provides clear, cold water. But the soil is thin, rocky, ungenerous. Thomas loses his legal battles over the land. In 1811, when Abraham is 2, they move 10 miles northeast to Knob Creek Farm. 230 acres with deeper, more fertile soil along the creek bottom. Perhaps 30 acres are suitable for planting. The rest is hills, forest, stone. Abraham's first memories form here. He remembers the cabin, larger than the one at Sinking Spring, but still rough, still primitive. He remembers his father planting corn and pumpkin seeds in neat rows. He remembers a flash flood roaring down Knob Creek without warning, washing away everything his father had planted. The violence of it, the suddenness, the way his father simply began again. He remembers the neighbors, the Gollaher family nearby, Austin Gollaher who becomes his playmate. They fish in the creek, explore the woods, get into the small troubles of frontier childhood. Once, Abraham falls into Knob Creek and nearly drowns before Austin pulls him out. He remembers the terror of the water closing over his head. He remembers, too, the Knob Creek Road. It runs right past the farm, a wilderness road connecting Louisville to Nashville, and travelers pass constantly. Wagons, riders, families moving west. Abraham watches them from the fields. He wonders where they're going, what they're seeking, whether the world beyond these Kentucky hills is different, better, stranger. But mostly, he remembers work, endless work. By the time he's 7, he's big enough to help his father with serious labor, clearing fields, splitting rails, caring for the livestock. Thomas is a stern man, not cruel, but hard, shaped by his own difficult childhood. He expects much from his son. Abraham learns early that life means sweat, calluses, aching muscles, exhaustion. And yet there's also his mother. Nancy is thin, stooped, deeply religious. She can read, which is more than Thomas can manage. She reads the Bible to her children. She teaches them letters when she can. Sarah Bush Johnston, who will later become Abraham's stepmother, will say that Nancy was a woman of great natural ability, who gave her son his mind and his nature. In 1816, Thomas makes a decision. Kentucky's land disputes have become intolerable. Indiana has opened to settlement, and it's free territory, no slavery. They will go. Abraham Lincoln is 7 years old when his family leaves Kentucky forever. Chapter 2. Mother in the Ground, December 1816. The Lincoln family crosses the Ohio River into Indiana, everything they own loaded onto a flatboat. Abraham is 7 years old, already tall for his age, watching the dark waters slide past. Indiana became a state just this year, and Spencer County, where they're headed, was formed only months ago. The land is raw, unsettled, thick with forest and promise. Thomas has purchased a quarter section, 160 acres, near a settlement called Little Pigeon Creek. But when they arrive, there is nothing. No cabin, no clearing, only unbroken wilderness. Winter is coming fast. Thomas builds what they call a half-faced camp, 3 walls of logs and boughs, the 4th side open to the weather. They hang a fire before the opening and huddle behind it, the flames their only defense against December's cold. Abraham will remember this always, sleeping in the half-faced camp, the wind cutting through, his mother trying to keep the children warm, the sounds of the forest at night. The panthers scream, the bears that prey on their swine, the absolute darkness when the fire burns low. Through the winter and into spring, Thomas and Abraham work to build a proper cabin. The boy is small but strong, and his father needs him. They fell trees, trim logs, notch and stack them. Abraham learns the rhythm of the axe, the way wood splits, the satisfaction of a clean cut. The cabin rises slowly, 18 by 20 feet, a dirt floor, a single door. No windows at first, a hole in the roof for smoke. It is crude, barely better than the half-faced camp, but it is theirs. They clear land for planting. The work is brutal, cutting trees, pulling stumps, breaking soil that has never known a plow. Abraham's hands blister, then callous. His back aches. His father works beside him, mostly silent, always demanding. This is life on the Indiana frontier, unending labor, small victories, the knowledge that survival is never guaranteed. But there are moments of lightness, too. Abraham explores the woods with other settler children. He helps his father hunt, though he develops a distaste for killing that will stay with him. Once he shoots a wild turkey and feels such remorse that he never hunts large game again. The forest is both provider and threat, and he learns to read it, which plants are edible, where animals water, how to move quietly through the undergrowth. His sister Sarah is his constant companion. She is 2 years older, more practical, steadier. When their mother is busy, Sarah mothers Abraham. They are close in the way frontier children must be, relying on each other in a world that offers few comforts. Then comes October 1818. Nancy Lincoln falls ill. They call it milk sickness, a mysterious affliction that strikes suddenly, causes trembling, vomiting, terrible pain. No one knows what causes it. Years later, they will understand. Cows eating white snake root, a poisonous plant, their milk becoming toxic. But in 1818, it is simply the dread malady, the curious illness that appears without warning. Nancy weakens rapidly. Thomas can do nothing. Abraham, 9 years old, watches his mother die. She is 34. On October 5th, she takes her last breath in the rough cabin on Little Pigeon Creek. Thomas makes a coffin from green pine. They carry Nancy to a knoll near the cabin and bury her there. There is no minister, no proper service. Abraham sees his mother lowered into Indiana soil, and something breaks inside him. He is a ragged 9-year-old standing at a fresh grave, and winter is coming. The months that follow are the unhappiest of his childhood. Thomas tries to manage the household, but he is ill-equipped for it. Sarah, only 11, does her best to cook and clean and care for Abraham. But the cabin is cold and joyless. The absence of their mother fills every corner. Abraham moves through his chores mechanically, his grief a weight he cannot name. Winter passes in gray misery. Spring comes, and still the sadness hangs over them. Then, in December 1819, Thomas Lincoln makes a journey. He travels back to Kentucky, to Elizabethtown. He is gone for weeks. When he returns, he brings a wagon. In the wagon, Sarah Bush Johnston, a widow he has known for years, and her 3 children, Elizabeth Matilda and John. Thomas has married again. The new Mrs. Lincoln steps down from the wagon and looks at the cabin, at the dirt floor, at the 2 thin, filthy children watching her warily. Abraham expects harshness. He has lost his mother. Now this stranger will take her place. But Sarah Bush Johnston Lincoln does something unexpected. She looks at Abraham, tall, gangly, intelligent eyes in a too thin face, and she sees something. She unpacks the wagon, furniture, bedding, dishes, books. She scrubs the cabin. She washes Abraham and Sarah, dresses them in clean clothes. And she tells Abraham, gently but firmly, that she will love him, that he is hers now. Chapter 3. The Education of Borrowed Books. Sarah Bush Lincoln transforms the cabin. Within days, there are beds with proper bedding, not just corn husk mattresses on the floor. There are plates and utensils, not just shared wooden bowls. There is a sense of order, of care, of a home, rather than merely a shelter. Her 3 children, Elizabeth, Matilda, and John, blend with Abraham and Sarah. The cabin is crowded now, 5 children in one room, but it is warm in ways that have nothing to do with the fire. And Sarah brings books, not many. A family Bible, worn from use. A copy of Aesop's fables. Perhaps 1 or 2 others. But to Abraham, it is treasure. He has learned his letters from his mother Nancy, has attended brief sessions at rough frontier schools, blab schools, where students recite lessons aloud in chaotic chorus. But his education has been sporadic, incomplete. He can read, barely. He can write his name, that is all. Sarah sees his hunger. She encourages him. When Thomas complains that the boy spends too much time with his nose in a book instead of working, Sarah defends him. She tells her husband that Abraham has a mind worth cultivating. Thomas, illiterate himself, does not understand this, but he loves Sarah, and so he relents grudgingly. Abraham attends school when itinerant teachers pass through, a few weeks here, a month there. The schoolhouses are crude log structures, if they exist at all. Sometimes lessons happen in someone's cabin. The teachers are barely educated themselves, knowing, as Lincoln later puts it, only readin', writin', and cipherin' to the rule of 3. If a teacher happens to know Latin, he is considered a wizard. By the time Abraham is 15, his total formal schooling amounts to less than 12 months. He will later describe it with a single word: defective. But he teaches himself. He borrows every book within walking distance, and walking distance on the frontier means miles. He reads The Pilgrim's Progress, losing himself in Bunyan's allegory. He reads Weems's Life of Washington, absorbing the story of the founding, of the general who became president, of leadership and virtue. He reads Robinson Crusoe, the tale of a man alone, surviving through ingenuity. He reads William Scott's Lessons in Elocution, practicing the speeches aloud in the woods where no one can hear him stumble over the words. When there is no paper in the house, and there rarely is, Abraham practices his writing and arithmetic on wooden boards, using charcoal as a makeshift pencil. He covers a board with figures and letters, then shaves it smooth and begins again. He works out mathematical problems on the back of a wooden shovel. He writes in the dust when he's plowing. At night, by the light of the fire, he reads until his eyes are red and burning. Sometimes he falls asleep with a book on his chest. In the morning, he returns to it before breakfast, reading while he eats, memorizing passages, training his mind to hold and manipulate language. His stepmother remembers him this way, disheveled, intense, lost in books. She says he would read everything he could lay his hands on. His childhood friend Austin Gollaher, visiting from Kentucky, is struck by Abraham's manic intellect, the sight of him red-eyed and tousle-haired, consumed by reading. Thomas grows increasingly frustrated. He needs Abraham for farm work, plowing, planting, harvesting, splitting rails. He hires the boy out to neighbors for manual labor, pocketing the wages, as is customary. Abraham shucks corn, hoes fields, gathers crops, works dawn to dusk for other men, while his father keeps the money. It breeds resentment in the boy. He feels he is being used, that his labor enriches his father, while his own future remains uncertain. To the neighbors, Abraham sometimes appears lazy. He is caught reading when he should be working. He stops mid-task to work out a problem in his head. He seems distracted elsewhere. But this is not laziness. It is a burning, relentless ambition to rise beyond this hardscrabble existence. Lincoln will later write about growing up in Indiana, describing it as a wild region with many bears and other wild animals still in the woods. The poverty was pretty pinching at times. The opportunities for education were almost non-existent, and yet he emerged from this wilderness with a gift for language that will one day surpass almost every other American statesman. He will teach himself law, grammar, rhetoric, logic, all from borrowed books, all by firelight, all through sheer force of will. His stepmother understands this about him, even if his father does not. Abe was a good boy, she will say years later. He didn't like physical labor, but he read diligently. What Sarah Bush Lincoln knows, what she protects, is that the boy is educating himself for a life beyond the forest. He is preparing to leave. Chapter 4. The River to New Orleans. Spring, 1828. Abraham is 19 years old now, lean and towering, 6 feet 4 inches tall, all sinew and strength from years of splitting rails and swinging an axe. A local farmer named James Gentry approaches him with an offer. Would Abraham accompany Gentry's son, Allen, on a flatboat journey down the Mississippi River to New Orleans? They will carry produce, corn, wheat, salted pork, to sell in the markets there. The pay is modest, but for a young man who has never traveled beyond Spencer County, it is irresistible. Abraham agrees immediately. They build the flatboat themselves, a crude rectangular vessel, perhaps 80 feet long, steered by long oars called sweeps. They load it with barrels and crates, with everything the frontier has to offer the wider world. And then they push off into the current, letting the river take them. The journey is long, slow, mesmerizing. They float past settlements and wilderness, past other boats heading downriver, past sandbars and snags that can tear the bottom from a flatboat if you're not careful. Abraham handles the sweeps, learning to read the water, to sense where the current runs strong or shallow. At night, they tie up along the shore, sleep under the stars, wake to the river's eternal murmur. Once, while tied up in Louisiana, they are attacked by 7 men, likely attempting to steal their cargo. Abraham and Allen fight them off with clubs and fists, Abraham's long arms and frontier strength proving decisive. The attackers flee. The young men push off immediately, floating through the darkness until they feel safe enough to sleep. And then, New Orleans. Abraham has never seen a city. Little Pigeon Creek has perhaps a dozen families. New Orleans has tens of thousands of people. The buildings rise multiple stories. The streets teem with merchants, sailors, travelers from a dozen nations, speaking languages Abraham cannot identify. There are shops selling goods he has never imagined. There are theaters, hotels, restaurants, and there are slave markets. They are impossible to miss. The auction blocks stand in prominent locations. Chained men, women, and children are displayed like livestock. Buyers examine them, checking teeth, muscles, discussing their qualities as casually as one might discuss a horse. The auctioneer's voice carries across the square, selling human beings to the highest bidder. Abraham watches. He says little, but something settles in him, something cold and hard. Historian Michael Burlingame will later write that the sight would leave an indelible impression on him. It is one thing to know intellectually that slavery exists. It is another to see a mother separated from her child, to watch a man sold away from his family, to witness the casual brutality of the thing. He had seen slavery before in passing. Kentucky was a slave state. But this industrial scale of human bondage, this marketplace of souls, this is different. Abraham and Allen sell their cargo, pocket their earnings, and sell the flatboat for lumber. Then they book passage on a steamboat heading back upriver. Abraham returns to Indiana changed. He does not speak much about what he saw. He is not yet an abolitionist, will not be for years. But something has shifted in his understanding of the world. 2 years later, in 1830, the Lincoln family moves again. Thomas has decided to try his fortunes in Illinois. They load their possessions onto a wagon and head west. Abraham, now 21, helps his father establish a farm in Macon County, near Decatur. He splits rails for fences, hundreds of them, thousands. His skill with an axe becomes legendary in the neighborhood. But Abraham has no intention of staying. He has seen New Orleans. He has glimpsed a world beyond farming, beyond the endless cycle of planting and harvesting and barely surviving. His father expects him to remain, to work the farm, to follow the pattern of frontier life. Instead, in the spring of 1831, Abraham Lincoln strikes out on his own. He heads for New Salem, a small village on the Sangamon River. 25 families, a general store, a mill. It is tiny, remote, barely a settlement at all, but it is his. Chapter 5. The Self-Made Man, July 1831. Abraham Lincoln arrives in New Salem, Illinois, with everything he owns and almost no money. The village sits on a bluff above the Sangamon River, perhaps 25 families, a handful of buildings, a grist mill, a general store. It is raw, frontier, temporary. Within 15 years, New Salem will be a ghost town, abandoned when the river proves too shallow for reliable commerce. But in 1831, it is full of hope and energy, and Abraham is part of that energy. He takes work as a clerk in Denton Offutt's general store. He weighs goods, keeps accounts, talks to customers. He is good with people, tells stories, jokes, makes even routine transactions entertaining. He is honest, scrupulously so. Once, realizing he has overcharged a customer by a few cents, he walks miles to return the money. The story spreads. People begin calling him Honest Abe. He is an odd figure, 6 feet 4 inches tall, awkward, dressed in ill-fitting clothes, his trousers always too short, revealing several inches of shin. His face is homely. He knows this. But there is something compelling about him. His voice carries. When he tells a story, people gather to listen. He has a gift for mimicry, for dialect, for drawing laughter from the hardest crowd. He makes friends easily. There is the schoolmaster mentor Graham, who loans him books on grammar and mathematics. There is Jack Armstrong, leader of a rough group called the Clary's Grove Boys, who wrestle Lincoln in a legendary match that ends in mutual respect rather than clear victory. There is James Rutledge, who runs the tavern where men gather to argue politics and drink whiskey, and there is Anne Rutledge, James's daughter. She is young, perhaps 22, red-haired, engaged to a man named John McNamara, who has left town on business and has not returned. Abraham becomes close to the Rutledge family. Whether his friendship with Anne develops into romance remains one of history's unresolved questions. Some historians insist they were in love. Others say the evidence is thin, that Lincoln's feelings may have been one-sided or simply affectionate without being romantic. But when Anne dies suddenly of typhoid fever on August 25, 1835, Abraham is devastated. He sinks into a profound depression, speaks of suicide, cannot work. Friends watch him carefully, keep him from being alone. He emerges slowly from the darkness, but something has changed. He carries what he will later call the hypo, melancholy, darkness, a depression that will visit him throughout his life, particularly during times of stress and loss. Meanwhile, he is educating himself. He borrows Kirkham's grammar textbook and studies it obsessively until he masters English syntax. He walks to the county seat in Springfield, 20 miles, to observe court proceedings, watching lawyers argue, judges rule, juries deliberate. He is fascinated by law, by the precision of legal reasoning, by the power of words to win or lose a case. He begins to imagine a different future. In April 1832, he enlists when the Black Hawk War breaks out, a conflict between the United States and Native American tribes in Illinois and Wisconsin. The volunteers elect Abraham captain of their company, an honor that surprises and pleases him. He sees no combat, spends most of his time marching and making camp. Years later, he will joke about his military service, saying his only battles were with mosquitoes and that he saw a good many bloody struggles with the mosquitoes. But the experience teaches him about leadership, about how to manage men, about the gap between military glory and military reality. When he returns to New Salem, he decides to enter politics. In August 1832, at age 23, He runs for the Illinois state legislature. His platform is simple, almost naive. My politics are short and sweet, like an old woman's dance. He supports a national bank, internal improvements, a high protective tariff. He is utterly unknown outside his immediate neighborhood. He loses badly, finishing 8th out of 13 candidates. But he is not discouraged. He takes work as a surveyor, learning to use instruments, to measure land, to draw maps. He becomes postmaster of New Salem, a position that pays almost nothing, but allows him to read every newspaper that comes through the post office before delivering it. He devours political news, economic theory, debates in distant state capitals, and he begins studying law. He borrows books from John Todd Stewart, a lawyer in Springfield who has become his mentor. He reads Blackstone's commentaries, the foundational text of English common law. He reads the Illinois statutes. He carries law books with him everywhere, reading as he walks, studying by candlelight after work. In 1834, he runs for the state legislature again. This time, he campaigns properly, visits every settlement in Sangamon County, shakes every hand, tells his stories, listens to people's concerns. Even Democrats support him. His manner is too genuine, too likable to oppose. He wins. At age 25, Abraham Lincoln is an elected member of the Illinois state legislature. He borrows money to buy his first suit. He cannot appear in the Capitol looking like a frontier roughneck. He makes arrangements to study law more seriously. He plans to move to Springfield within a few years. The transformation has begun. The rail splitter is becoming a lawyer. The backwoods boy is becoming a politician. He is making himself into something new, something the world has not seen before. Chapter 6. Anne Rutledge and the Black Dog, August 25, 1835, New Salem, Illinois. The summer heat presses down, heavy and still. In the Rutledge Tavern, Anne Rutledge lies dying of typhoid fever. She is 22 years old, red-haired, known throughout the village for her kindness and intelligence. For days, she has been burning with fever, delirious, fading. The doctor can do nothing. Her family gathers around her bed, helpless. Abraham Lincoln, 26 years old, is among those who keep vigil. When Anne dies that evening, something breaks inside him. The nature of their relationship remains one of history's mysteries. William Herndon, Lincoln's law partner, will later insist they were deeply in love, engaged to be married. He will collect testimonies from New Salem residents who remember seeing them together, who believed Anne was the love of Lincoln's life. But David Herbert Donald and other historians point out that the evidence is thin, much of it collected decades after the fact, colored by people's knowledge of Lincoln's later fame and tragic end. What is known, Anne was engaged to John McNamar, a store owner who left New Salem in 1832 to visit his family in New York and never returned. What is known, Abraham became close to the Rutledge family, spent time at their tavern, knew Anne well. What is known, when she died, Abraham's grief was profound and alarming. He cannot work, he cannot eat. He wanders through New Salem talking to himself, speaking of death, of joining Anne, of the pointlessness of continuing. His friends, Bowling Green, James Short, others, watch him constantly, afraid he will harm himself. They keep him away from knives, from the river, from solitude. He tells them he cannot bear the thought of rain falling on her grave. This is not ordinary grief. This is something darker, deeper, a chasm opening inside him. Years later, he will call it the hypochondria, melancholy, what we would now recognize as clinical depression. It is not his first encounter with this darkness. He has felt it before, in smaller doses. But Anne's death plunges him into its depths. Slowly, over weeks, his friends pull him back. They keep him busy, force him to eat, refuse to let him sink completely. By late autumn, he is functioning again, returning to his work in the legislature, taking up his law studies, but he is changed. Those who know him see it, a sadness in his eyes that was not there before, a distance, as though part of him remained somewhere else. The melancholy will never fully leave him. Throughout his life, it will descend without warning, periods of darkness when he struggles to function, when the weight of existence feels unbearable. He will learn to manage it, to work through it, to use humor and storytelling as shields against the void. But it is always there, lurking. In March 1836, he receives his law license. On September 9, 1836, the Illinois Supreme Court certifies him to practice. On March 1, 1837, his name is entered on the roll of attorneys. Abraham Lincoln, who has never attended law school, who taught himself from borrowed books, is now officially a lawyer. John Todd Stewart, his mentor, offers him a partnership. The firm will be Stewart & Lincoln, based in Springfield, the new state capital. It is an extraordinary opportunity. Stewart is well-connected, respected, a member of the legislature alongside Lincoln. He sees potential in this awkward, melancholy young man from New Salem. On April 15, 1837, Abraham packs his belongings, which fit easily into 2 saddlebags, and rides to Springfield. He arrives with $7 in his pocket. He finds Joshua Speed's general store on the town square and asks the price of bedding for a single bed. Speed calculates $17. Lincoln says quietly that he does not have $17, that he will try to earn it by fall, but if he fails, he supposes Speed will have to wait. Speed, struck by something in Lincoln's manner, the honesty, the vulnerability, offers him a room above the store, rent-free. They will share Speed's large bed. Lincoln carries his saddlebags upstairs, returns a moment later, and says simply, "Well, Speed, I'm moved." It is the beginning of one of the most important friendships of Lincoln's life. Speed is educated from a wealthy Kentucky family, charming, comfortable in society in ways Lincoln is not. They talk late into the night about politics, law, philosophy, women. Speed becomes Lincoln's confidant, the person who understands his moods, his darkness, his ambitions. Springfield in 1837 is raw and muddy, barely a town, but it is the state capital and therefore the center of Illinois politics. Lincoln throws himself into his law practice and his legislative duties. He is part of a group called the Long Nine, 9 legislators from Sangamon County, all over 6 feet tall, who successfully lobbied to move the capital from Vandalia to Springfield. Lincoln's political skills are sharpening. He is learning to count votes, to make deals, to navigate the complicated machinery of government. But personally, he is adrift. He courts Mary Owens, a woman from Kentucky visiting her sister in New Salem. They discuss marriage. Then Lincoln develops cold feet, writes her a letter, essentially releasing her from any obligation to marry him. She declines his proposal, such as it was, and returns to Kentucky. Lincoln is relieved and ashamed in equal measure. He is 28 years old, a successful lawyer and legislator, and he does not know who he is or what he wants, beyond a vague sense that he is meant for something larger. The darkness still visits. There are days when he cannot get out of bed, when the weight of existence paralyzes him. He writes poetry, dark, brooding verses about mortality and decay. He memorizes long passages from Shakespeare's tragedies, particularly the soliloquies about death and despair. Friends worry about him. But he also develops defenses. He becomes known for his humor, his endless supply of stories and jokes. He can walk into a room of strangers and within minutes have them laughing. This is both genuine and strategic. The humor keeps people at a distance, prevents them from seeing the darkness beneath. It also keeps him functional, gives him a role to play when his own emotional life feels too heavy to bear. By 1839, he is established in Springfield, a rising lawyer, a respected legislator, a man with a future. But he carries his ghosts. Anne Rutledge, whether she was his love or simply his friend, remains with him. The depression remains with him. The sense that he is different, set apart, marked by something he cannot name, that remains with him too. He is becoming Abraham Lincoln, but the process is painful, incomplete, shadowed by losses he cannot undo. Chapter 7. The House on 8th Street, December 1839. Springfield's social season is in full swing, such as it is in this frontier capital. At a cotillion dance, Abraham Lincoln, 30 years old, awkward in formal clothes, his trousers still too short, meets Mary Ann Todd. She is 21, from Lexington, Kentucky, daughter of Robert Smith Todd, a wealthy banker and merchant. She has attended finishing school, speaks French, writes poetry, discusses politics with an intensity that startles men who expect women to be decorative and quiet. She is short, plump, with clear blue eyes and a sharp tongue. She is visiting her sister Elizabeth, who has married Ninian Edwards, son of a former Illinois governor. The Edwards live in the finest house in Springfield, on Quality Hill, where the town's elite have built their homes. Mary is part of this world, educated, cultured, ambitious. Abraham is decidedly not. He is a self-made man from dirt-floor poverty, his manners rough, his background embarrassing, and yet something sparks between them. They talk politics. Mary is a passionate Whig, like Abraham, and she understands the intricacies of policy and power better than most men. She is attracted to his intelligence, his potential, his stories. He is attracted to her wit, her confidence, her belief that he is destined for greatness. She tells him she wants to marry a man who will become president. He jokes that he supposes he will have to do then. They begin courting formally in 1840. The Edwards family is appalled. Ninian Edwards tells Mary she is throwing herself away on a man with no family, no money, no social standing. Mary ignores him. She has decided that Abraham Lincoln will be someone, and she intends to be the woman beside him when he rises. They become engaged. And then, in the winter of 1840-1841, something fractures. The details are murky, lost to history. Lincoln breaks off the engagement abruptly, either on January 1st, 1841, a day he will later call the fatal 1st of Jani, 41, or shortly thereafter. He is consumed with doubt, anxiety, fear. Is he capable of making Mary happy? Does he truly love her? Can he bear the weight of marriage when his own darkness threatens to pull him under? He sinks into depression again, worse than anything since Anne Rutledge's death. He misses sessions of the legislature. He writes to his law partner, John Todd Stewart, "I am now the most miserable man living. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on the earth." Joshua Speed, his closest friend, is deeply worried. The two of them spend hours talking, Speed trying to pull Lincoln back from the edge. Finally, in August 1841, Lincoln visits Speed in Kentucky. Speed's family owns a plantation called Farmington, with dozens of enslaved people working the land. Lincoln observes the system up close again, sees the humanity of the enslaved people, the casual cruelty of their bondage. But the visit is primarily about Speed himself, who is engaged to Fanny Henning and plagued by his own doubts about marriage. The two men counsel each other through long conversations. Lincoln helps convince Speed to go through with the wedding. Speed's marriage, in February 1842, seems happy, stable. This gives Lincoln courage. Through the spring and summer of 1842, Lincoln and Mary begin seeing each other again, secretly at first, at the Edwards home. Their mutual friend Julia Jane facilitates their reconciliation. By autumn, they have decided to marry. On November 4th, 1842, Abraham tells the Edwardses that he and Mary will marry that very evening. There is no time for elaborate preparations. The ceremony takes place in the Edwards parlor, with a Presbyterian minister officiating. Lincoln, standing at the altar, looks so stricken that James Matheny, his groomsman, later says Lincoln appeared as if he was going to the slaughter. When someone asks where he's going, Lincoln replies, "To hell, I suppose." But he goes through with it. He places a ring on Mary's finger, inscribed with the words, "Love is eternal." They move into a room at the Globe Tavern, $8 a week for room and board. It is not romantic, not private, thin walls, shared dining room, the sounds of other lodgers constantly present. But it is theirs. On August 1st, 1843, their first child is born, Robert Todd Lincoln. Mary is a devoted mother, though prone to fierce mood swings, joy one moment, rage the next. Abraham adores the baby, but has no idea how to care for an infant. He is often at the law office or traveling the circuit. Mary is left alone much of the time. The marriage is turbulent from the start. Mary has a violent temper. She throws things, screams, berates Abraham in front of visitors. He responds with silence, withdrawing into himself, leaving the house until she calms down. Neighbors hear the fights. Friends are embarrassed to witness them. But there is also genuine affection. Mary believes in Abraham absolutely, pushes him toward greater ambition, reminds him constantly that he is meant for important things. He appreciates her intelligence, values her political insights, confides in her about his work. They call each other mother and father, the Victorian custom. In private moments, there is tenderness. In 1844, they buy a house, a modest 1.5-story cottage at 8th and Jackson Streets, painted brown, with a white picket fence. It costs $1,500. For the first time in his life, Abraham Lincoln owns a home. They will expand it over the years, raising the roof, adding rooms as their family grows. Edward Baker Lincoln, Eddie, is born in 1846. The house fills with the chaos of two small boys. Abraham is a permissive father, lets the children climb on him, interrupt his work, make messes. Mary is more demanding, more volatile, trying to impose order on a household that resists order. In 1846, Abraham is elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, Illinois' only Whig congressman. It is the achievement Mary has been pushing him toward. They will move to Washington for his term, taking the boys with them. The house on 8th Street will wait for their return, though Eddie will not live to see it. The marriage will endure, fractious, complicated, genuine, through triumph and unbearable loss. For now, in the winter of 1846, Abraham Lincoln prepares to enter the national stage, and Mary prepares to be the wife of a congressman, the role she was born to play. Chapter 8. Riding the Circuit, Spring, 1844. Abraham Lincoln packs his saddlebags with law books, a change of clothes, and papers for the cases ahead. His new law partner, William Herndon, young, passionate, more widely read than Lincoln, will mind their Springfield office. Lincoln is heading out on the 8th Judicial Circuit, and he will be gone for weeks. Twice a year, spring and fall, the Circuit Court makes its rounds through 14 counties in central Illinois. The judge, David Davis, a large, jovial man who will become Lincoln's close friend, travels with a rotating group of lawyers from county seat to county seat. They ride together, eat together, sleep in rough taverns and boarding houses together. It is a traveling community, a university of human nature and frontier law. Lincoln thrives here in ways he never does in Springfield. The cases are mostly mundane: property disputes, debt collection, assault and battery, the occasional murder trial. A farmer sues his neighbor over a boundary line. A merchant demands payment for goods delivered. A man is accused of stealing a horse. Lincoln handles them all, sometimes defending, sometimes prosecuting, always prepared, always effective before a jury. His manner is perfect for frontier courtrooms. He speaks plainly, tells stories that make complex legal points simple, uses humor to disarm hostile witnesses. Jurors trust him. He has a gift for seeing through to the heart of a case, for finding the one fact or argument that matters most. Once, defending a young man named Duff Armstrong, son of Jack Armstrong, his old New Salem friend, accused of murder, Lincoln uses an almanac to prove that a witness could not have seen what he claimed to see by moonlight. The moon had already set at the time the witness specified. Duff Armstrong is acquitted. The travel is hard. They ride horseback or take crude wagons over roads that are barely roads. Mud in spring, dust in summer, frozen ruts in fall. They sleep in taverns where the beds are often shared, where the food is rough and the rooms are cold. Lincoln never complains. He seems happiest in these simple circumstances, freed from Mary's temper and domestic obligations. Judge Davis will later say, "In my opinion, Lincoln was happy as he could be when on this circuit, and happy no other place." In the evenings, after court adjourns, the lawyers gather around wood stoves in tavern common rooms. They swap stories, argue politics, drink whiskey. Lincoln is the center of these gatherings, his fund of stories seemingly inexhaustible. He can mimic dialects, act out scenes, reduce grown men to tears of laughter. But even here, even among friends, he maintains a certain distance. No one knows him completely. By 1850, as railroads begin to cross Illinois, travel becomes easier and the practice more lucrative. Lincoln earns $200 to $1,500 annually, more than the state governor's salary. He represents the Illinois Central Railroad itself, helping secure its charter, serving as its regular attorney. He is becoming one of the most distinguished lawyers in the state. Over his legal career, Lincoln will be involved in more than 5,600 cases. The circuit teaches him patience, pragmatism, how to read people, how to craft arguments that persuade. These skills, honed in rough courtrooms before skeptical frontier juries, will serve him later in ways he cannot imagine. For now, he rides from courthouse to courthouse, solving other people's problems, earning his living, preparing, without knowing it, for a much larger stage. Chapter 9. A House Divided Cannot Stand. May 30, 1854. Congress passes the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Senator Stephen A. Douglas of Illinois, Lincoln's old rival, a brilliant, ambitious man they call the Little Giant, is the architect. The law allows settlers in Kansas and Nebraska territories to decide by popular vote whether to permit slavery, effectively repealing the Missouri Compromise that has kept an uneasy peace for 34 years. Abraham Lincoln, practicing law in Springfield, reads the news and feels something ignite inside him. He has been largely absent from politics since his single term in Congress ended in 1849. He returned home disappointed, convinced he had little influence, focusing on building his law practice. But this he cannot ignore. He studies the Kansas-Nebraska Act obsessively, reads the congressional debates, traces its implications. What Douglas calls popular sovereignty, letting territories decide for themselves, sounds democratic, reasonable. But Lincoln sees it differently. It opens all Western territories to slavery. It betrays the founding generation's hope that slavery would die a natural death, contained where it already exists. It makes the expansion of human bondage a permanent feature of American growth. In October 1854, Lincoln delivers a speech in Peoria that marks his return to politics. For 3 hours, he argues against Douglas's doctrine. He does not claim to know how to end slavery where it already exists. The Constitution protects it there, he acknowledges. But the Western territories are different. They are free soil, and they should remain so. I hate slavery, he says, because it deprives our Republican example of its just influence in the world, enables the enemies of free institutions with plausibility to taunt us as hypocrites, causes the real friends of freedom to doubt our sincerity. The speech is measured, careful, not abolitionist, but firmly anti-slavery expansion. It articulates what many Northerners feel, but cannot express. Lincoln is not calling for immediate abolition. He is calling for keeping slavery from spreading, placing it where the public mind shall rest in the belief that it is in course of ultimate extinction. The political landscape is shifting. The Whig Party is collapsing. A new party is emerging, the Republicans, formed specifically to oppose slavery's expansion. Lincoln joins them, though cautiously. He helps organize the Illinois Republican Party, becomes one of its leaders. Then comes 1858. Douglas's Senate seat is up for election. Illinois Republicans nominate Lincoln to challenge him. On June 16th, at the state capitol in Springfield, Lincoln accepts the nomination with a speech that will define his political career. A house divided against itself cannot stand, he begins, quoting scripture. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall. But I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. His advisers are alarmed. The speech sounds radical, even threatening. Lincoln is saying there can be no permanent compromise, that the nation must eventually be entirely free or entirely slave. Douglas will use this against him, they warn. Lincoln knows this, but he believes it is true, and he believes it needs to be said. Douglas does use it against him, painting Lincoln as a dangerous radical who wants to force the South to abolish slavery immediately, who advocates racial equality and intermarriage. Throughout the summer and fall, they debate 7 times across Illinois, Ottawa, Freeport, Jonesboro, Charleston, Galesburg, Quincy, Alton. Thousands attend each debate, standing for hours in heat and cold, to hear these 2 men argue about slavery and the nation's future. Lincoln is careful. He states repeatedly that he believes the Constitution protects slavery in states where it exists, that he has no power and no intention to interfere with it there. He denies supporting full racial equality. Such a position would be political suicide in 1858 Illinois. But he insists that slavery is morally wrong, that it cannot be allowed to spread, that the Declaration's promise that all men are created equal includes Black Americans, even if their full citizenship rights remain unrecognized. Douglas is more skilled politically, more experienced, more polished. When the state legislature meets to choose the senator, senators are not yet directly elected. Douglas wins. Lincoln has lost. But the debates have been published in newspapers across the nation. Lincoln's arguments, his careful reasoning, his moral clarity on the slavery question, these have reached millions. His name is known now from New York to California. The defeat stings deeply. But something else has happened, something Lincoln cannot yet see. He has become a national figure, and the next chapter reveals something no one ever expected. Chapter 10. The nomination nobody expected. May 16, 1860, Chicago. A massive wooden structure called the Wigwam rises at the corner of Lake and Market Streets, built specifically for the Republican National Convention. It can hold 10,000 people, and today it is packed. Delegates, spectators, journalists, political operatives, all sweating in the unseasonable heat, all watching to see who will lead the Republican Party into the most consequential election in American history. William H. Seward of New York is the overwhelming favorite. He has been governor, senator, a leader of the anti-slavery movement for years. He is experienced, eloquent, well-connected. His supporters are so confident that they have paraded through Chicago's streets the night before with bands and banners, certain of victory. Abraham Lincoln is barely mentioned in the national newspapers. He is known in Illinois, respected for his debates with Douglas, but he has held no major office since his single term in Congress 12 years ago. He is considered too moderate for the radicals, too anti-slavery for the conservatives, too unknown for the nation. He is, at best, a dark horse candidate who might emerge if the convention deadlocks. But Lincoln's campaign managers, David Davis, Norman Judd, Leonard Swett, understand something the Seward people do not. This convention will be won not by the candidate with the most passionate supporters, but by the candidate who offends the fewest delegates. Seward has made enemies. His long career means long-standing feuds. His radical rhetoric has scared moderates. He cannot win the border states. Lincoln, by contrast, has almost no enemies. His House Divided speech gave him credibility with radicals. His careful positions on slavery reassure moderates. He is from Illinois, a critical swing state, and his life story, born in a log cabin, self-educated, rail-splitter, self-made man, embodies the Republican ideal of free labor and social mobility. Davis and his team work the delegates relentlessly. They make deals, offer promises, trade favors. They pack the Wigwam with Lincoln supporters who cheer thunderously at every mention of his name, creating an illusion of inevitability. They print thousands of tickets for the gallery and distribute them to Lincoln men before the Seward supporters can enter. The balloting begins. First ballot. Seward leads with 173-1-2 votes. Lincoln has 102. Chase, Cameron, and Bates trail further behind. The threshold for nomination is 233 votes. Lincoln is in Springfield, pacing in the telegraph office, waiting for news. His hands are sweaty. He tries to appear calm, but cannot. Second ballot. Seward gains only 11 votes, reaching 184-1-2. But Lincoln surges to 181. He has picked up votes from delegates whose first-choice candidates are eliminated, from Cameron's Pennsylvania supporters, from scattered delegates across the North. The Wigwam roars with each announcement. Lincoln is surging. In Springfield, Lincoln reads the telegram and feels his heart hammering. Third ballot. The delegations confer frantically. Ohio switches 4 votes from Chase to Lincoln. Pennsylvania holds firm for Lincoln. Massachusetts shifts votes. The tally is called state by state. When it is over, Lincoln has 231-1-2 votes, just 1-1-2 short of the nomination. The wigwam falls silent. Every person in the building understands what is about to happen. Then a delegate from Ohio stands and announces that 4 delegates are switching from Chase to Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln is the Republican nominee for President of the United States. The wigwam erupts. The cheering is so loud it can be heard blocks away. Outside, a man fires a cannon on the roof. The sound echoes across Chicago. People pour into the streets, shouting Lincoln's name. Seward's supporters stand stunned, unable to believe what has happened. In Springfield, the telegraph operator hands Lincoln the message. Lincoln reads it, stands motionless for a moment, then says quietly, "There's a little woman down at our house who would like to hear this news." He walks home through the streets to tell Mary. The Democratic Party, meanwhile, has fractured. They met in Charleston in April and could not agree on a candidate. Northern Democrats eventually nominate Stephen Douglas. Southern Democrats nominate John Breckinridge of Kentucky, who explicitly supports slavery expansion. A third party, the Constitutional Union Party, nominates John Bell of Tennessee, promising to ignore the slavery question entirely and preserve the Union through silence. The field is fractured. The Republicans are united. And Lincoln has the advantage of geography. If he can win the North, he can win the presidency without a single Southern vote. He does not campaign personally. Presidential candidates do not by tradition. Instead, he manages the campaign from Springfield, writing letters, consulting with advisors, crafting careful statements on policy. His strategy is simple: unite the North, emphasize free labor and opportunity, avoid inflammatory statements about slavery, reassure the South that he will not interfere where slavery already exists. On November 6, 1860, the nation votes. Lincoln wins decisively in the North. He receives 1,865,000 popular votes, not even 40% of the total, but 180 electoral votes, well above the 152 needed to win. He receives almost no votes in the South. In 10 Southern states, his name does not even appear on the ballot. On December 20th, South Carolina secedes from the Union. By February 1st, 6 more states follow: Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas. Abraham Lincoln has won the presidency, and the nation is breaking apart. Chapter 11. Fort Sumter and the Coming Storm, March 4th, 1861. Washington, D.C. Abraham Lincoln stands before the unfinished Capitol dome and takes the oath of office. 7 states have already seceded. The air is thick with rumors of assassination plots. Sharpshooters are positioned on nearby rooftops. Lincoln's journey from Springfield has been tense, with warnings of violence forcing him to slip through Baltimore in the middle of the night, a humiliation the newspapers mock endlessly. In his inaugural address, Lincoln tries to thread an impossible needle. He speaks directly to the South. "I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. I believe I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so." But he is equally firm about the Union. No state upon its own mere motion can lawfully get out of the Union. Secession is illegal. The Union is perpetual. His final words are conciliatory, almost pleading. "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection." The South is not listening. They have already formed the Confederate States of America, elected Jefferson Davis as president, drafted their own constitution, and claimed all federal property within their borders. which brings Lincoln to his first crisis. On his first full day in office, March 5th, Lincoln reads a letter from Major Robert Anderson, commander of Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. Anderson reports that his garrison is running out of food. He has perhaps 6 weeks of supplies remaining, and he estimates it would require 20,000 troops to successfully resupply and defend the fort against Confederate forces surrounding the harbor. Lincoln faces an impossible choice: abandon Fort Sumter, and he begins his presidency by surrendering to rebellion, by implicitly recognizing Confederate independence, but attempt to resupply it, and he risks starting a war. For weeks, Lincoln agonizes. His cabinet is divided. Some urge evacuation, others demand the fort be held at all costs. Lincoln decides on a middle course. He will send provisions only, food, not weapons, not reinforcements, a humanitarian mission. He notifies South Carolina's governor of his intentions. Now it is Jefferson Davis who must choose: allow the resupply and tacitly acknowledge federal authority, or use force to stop it. Davis chooses force. At 4:30 a.m. on April 12, 1861, Confederate batteries under General P.G.T. Beauregard open fire on Fort Sumter. The bombardment lasts 34 hours. Anderson's small garrison returns fire, but is hopelessly outgunned. On April 13th, with the fort burning and supplies exhausted, Anderson surrenders. No one has been killed, but everything has changed. The Civil War has begun. On April 15th, Lincoln calls for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion. In response, 4 more states secede: Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas. The House, divided, is falling. Chapter 12. The Weight of 1,000 Battles, Summer 1861. Abraham Lincoln walks the corridors of the White House at night, unable to sleep, reading casualty reports by lamplight. The war everyone expected to last 90 days shows no sign of ending. At Bull Run in July, Union forces fled in panic back to Washington, the rout so complete that congressmen who had ridden out to watch the battle found themselves caught in the chaos of retreat. Lincoln must learn to be a military commander, though he has no training for it. His total combat experience consists of a few months in the Black Hawk War, chasing mosquitoes through Illinois. Now he commands armies, makes decisions that send thousands of men to their deaths, tries to understand strategy and logistics and the terrible arithmetic of war. The generals frustrate him endlessly. General George B. McClellan, appointed to command the Army of the Potomac, is brilliant at organization, at drilling troops, at preparation, but he will not fight. He always needs more men, more supplies, more time. Lincoln writes to him, "If you don't want to use the army, I should like to borrow it for a while." McClellan is replaced by John Pope, who loses badly at Second Bull Run. Then McClellan again. Then Ambrose Burnside, who sends wave after wave of Union soldiers to slaughter at Fredericksburg, 12,000 casualties against impregnable Confederate positions. Then Joseph Hooker, who loses at Chancellorsville despite having twice the enemy's numbers. Lincoln spends hours in the War Department telegraph office, reading dispatches, sending orders, trying to understand why his armies cannot win. He teaches himself military strategy, reads books on tactics, studies maps until he can visualize terrain he has never seen. As Commander-in-Chief, he is legally the highest-ranking officer in the United States military, and he takes the responsibility seriously, promoting and demoting generals, testing them, searching desperately for someone who will fight. The personal cost compounds the military frustration. In February 1862, 11-year-old Willie Lincoln falls ill with typhoid fever, likely contracted from the White House water supply, contaminated by sewage. For days, he burns with fever while Lincoln and Mary keep vigil. On February 20th, Willie dies. Mary collapses, takes to her bed for weeks, cannot function. Lincoln must continue working. The war does not pause for private grief, but those who see him notice the change. His face becomes more lined, more gaunt. His eyes sink deeper. He ages visibly, rapidly. He had already lost Eddie in 1850, dead at 3 years old. Now Willie, bright, kind Willie, his favorite, is gone too. Lincoln has the boy's body embalmed and placed in a temporary crypt, but he returns to it again and again, has the coffin opened, looks at his son's face. The grief is crushing, but he cannot indulge it. Thousands of other fathers are losing sons on battlefields across Virginia and Tennessee and Mississippi. Every morning, Lincoln reads the casualty lists. The numbers are staggering, unimaginable. At Shiloh in April 1862, 23,000 casualties in 2 days. At Antietam in September, 23,000 in a single day, the bloodiest day in American history. The scale of death is beyond anything anyone anticipated. Lincoln walks through Washington hospitals, visiting wounded soldiers. He shakes their hands, asks about their homes, listens to their stories. They are boys, most of them, 18, 20 years old, missing limbs, burning with fever, dying slowly in crowded wards. He thanks them for their service. Sometimes, after these visits, he returns to his office and weeps. At night, he paces the White House halls. Secretary John Hay, sleeping nearby, hears Lincoln's footsteps, back and forth, hour after hour. The weight is unbearable, the dead soldiers, the failing generals, the political pressures from all sides, the knowledge that every decision he makes will kill more young men. But amid the carnage, a conviction is crystallizing in his mind. Perhaps there is a way to make this slaughter mean something more than mere preservation of the Union. Perhaps he can make it a war for human freedom. Chapter 13. The Emancipation, July 1862. Abraham Lincoln summons his cabinet to the White House. The war is going badly. McClellan's Peninsula Campaign has failed. The Union has won no significant victories in months. The British and French are considering recognizing the Confederacy as a legitimate nation. Lincoln reads them a document he has drafted. It declares that on January 1st, 1863, all enslaved people in rebel states shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. The room falls silent. Lincoln has always personally hated slavery. He said so in New Salem, said so in his debates with Douglas. But as president, he has insisted he has no constitutional power to end it where it already exists. He has prioritized preserving the Union above all else. In August 1862, responding to newspaper editor Horace Greeley's demand for emancipation, Lincoln will write, "My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and is not either to save or to destroy slavery." But that is for public consumption. Privately, Lincoln has been moving toward this moment for months. He understands the calculation. As commander-in-chief during rebellion, he has war powers he would not possess in peacetime. He can declare enemy property confiscated. And enslaved people are, under Confederate law, property. More than that, they are the Confederacy's labor force, growing food, building fortifications, freeing white men to fight. Emancipation becomes a military necessity. But Secretary of State William Seward advises caution. If Lincoln issues this proclamation now, after a string of defeats, it will look like desperation. The world will see it as a last-ditch attempt by a failing government. Wait, Seward counsels, until the Union wins a significant victory. Lincoln agrees to wait. On September 17, 1862, the armies clash at Antietam Creek in Maryland. The battle is horrific. 23,000 casualties. But McClellan, for once, holds the field. Lee retreats back into Virginia. It is not a decisive victory, but it is enough. 5 days later, on September 22nd, Lincoln issues the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. It gives the Confederate States 100 days to return to the Union. If they do not, all enslaved people in rebel territory will be declared free as of January 1st, 1863. The Confederacy, of course, does not return. Through the autumn, Lincoln refines the document. He removes earlier language about compensated emancipation and colonization, ideas he once supported, suggesting that freed Black Americans might be colonized to Africa or Central America. Those passages are gone now. He adds language suggested by Treasury Secretary Salmon Chase, declaring emancipation not just a military measure, but an act of justice. January 1st, 1863, arrives. The weather in Washington is mild and bright. Lincoln attends the traditional New Year's reception at the White House, shaking hundreds of hands for hours. His right hand is swollen and aching when he finally sits down to sign the Emancipation Proclamation. He picks up the pen, then pauses. His hand trembles slightly, from the handshaking, from exhaustion, from the weight of what he is about to do. I never in my life felt more certain that I was doing right than I do in signing this paper, he tells those gathered. If my name ever goes into history, it will be for this act. He signs, Abraham Lincoln. The proclamation is imperfect. It does not free enslaved people in the border states, Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware, which remain in the Union. It explicitly exempts parts of the Confederacy already under Union control. It only applies to territory in rebellion, territory Lincoln's government does not actually control, but it transforms the war. Every advance of Union armies now expands the domain of freedom, and crucially, it authorizes the enrollment of black men into the Union military. By war's end, nearly 200,000 African American soldiers and sailors will serve the Union cause, many of them formerly enslaved. The proclamation confirms what enslaved people have insisted from the war's beginning. This must become a war for freedom, not just for Union. Lincoln has made it so. Chapter 14, Gettysburg and a few appropriate remarks, July 1st, 1863. A small Pennsylvania town called Gettysburg becomes, by accident, the site of the war's most crucial battle. Confederate General Robert E. Lee has invaded the North, threatening Washington, hoping that a decisive victory on Union soil will break Northern will and bring foreign recognition to the Confederacy. Union General George Meade's army moves to intercept him. The armies collide on the ridges and fields around Gettysburg. For 3 days, they fight with a ferocity that shocks even veteran soldiers. On the first day, Confederates push Union forces back through the town. On the second, desperate fighting at places with names that will echo through history. Little Round Top, Devil's Den, the Peach Orchard, Cemetery Ridge. On the third day, Lee orders a massive assault across open ground, Pickett's charge. 15,000 Confederate soldiers advance in perfect formation across a mile of open field, under artillery and rifle fire so devastating that only a few hundred reach the Union lines. They are driven back. The casualties are staggering. 51,000 men killed, wounded, or missing in 3 days. The fields are carpeted with bodies. The wounded cry out for water, for help, for their mothers. The town's residents emerge after the battle to find their streets, their yards, their homes transformed into vast hospitals and morgues. Lee retreats into Virginia. Meade, cautious as always, does not pursue aggressively. Lincoln is frustrated. The war could have ended here if Meade had destroyed Lee's army. But it is still a Union victory, the first major one in the East. And on the same day, Lee begins his retreat, July 4th. News arrives from Mississippi. General Ulysses S. Grant has captured Vicksburg after a long siege, splitting the Confederacy in two. The tide is turning. In Gettysburg, the work of burial begins. Thousands of bodies decompose in the July heat. The town's few hundred residents cannot manage it alone. A cemetery is planned on Cemetery Hill, where Union forces held the line. The dedication is scheduled for November 19th. Edward Everett, the most famous orator in America, is invited to deliver the main address. Almost as an afterthought, President Lincoln is invited to make a few appropriate remarks. Lincoln accepts. He needs this, needs to explain to himself and to the nation what these deaths mean. Why 51,000 men at Gettysburg? Why the hundreds of thousands across 3 years of war? Why any of this terrible sacrifice matters. He drafts his speech in Washington, continues working on it during the train journey to Gettysburg, refines it the night before in the house where he is staying. It is short, just 272 words. He worries it is too short, inadequate to the occasion. November 19th dawns cold and clear. 15,000 people gather at the cemetery. Edward Everett speaks first, for 2 hours, a masterpiece of classical oratory, comparing the battle to Marathon, invoking Greek and Roman history, painting word pictures of the battle's drama. The crowd listens attentively. It is exactly what they expect from a great public occasion. Then Lincoln stands. He is tall, gaunt, dressed in black. He adjusts his spectacles. In his high, clear voice that carries across the crowd, he begins, 'Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.' He does not describe the battle. He does not praise individual acts of heroism. Instead, he does something unexpected. He redefines the war itself. The war, he says, is testing whether any nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal can survive. The soldiers who died here have already consecrated this ground far above our poor power to add or detract. The living cannot hallow this place. The dead have done that. What the living must do is ensure that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." He speaks for just over 2 minutes. The crowd barely has time to react before he sits down. There is applause, but not the thunderous ovation that followed Everett. Many think the speech is too brief, too simple, too plain for the occasion. Lincoln himself thinks it is a failure. He tells a friend, "It will not scour. It won't be remembered. It won't make an impression." He is wrong. Edward Everett writes to him the next day, "I should be glad if I could flatter myself that I came as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes." The speech is reprinted in newspapers across the North. People read it slowly, carefully, multiple times. They begin to understand what Lincoln has done. He has taken the founding document, the Declaration of Independence, and its promise that all men are created equal, and made it the war's central meaning. He has transformed a war to preserve the Union into something larger, a test of whether democracy itself can survive, whether a government based on human equality can endure. A new birth of freedom, not just preserving the old Union, but creating something better. A Union where the Declaration's promise actually means something. A Union without slavery. The Gettysburg Address, though Lincoln does not know it yet, will stand alongside the Declaration and the Constitution as one of the defining texts of American democracy. It will be memorized by school children, carved into monuments, quoted by presidents and protesters. In 272 words, Lincoln has given the war its meaning. The killing will continue for another 18 months. More battles, more casualties, more grief. But now there is purpose behind the suffering, a vision of what all this death might achieve. The nation, Lincoln has promised, will have a new birth of freedom. The question is whether the nation will survive long enough to see it. Chapter 15. Grant and the Long Road to Appomattox, March 9, 1864. Abraham Lincoln promotes Ulysses S. Grant to lieutenant general, a rank held by only one other man in American history, George Washington. Grant takes command of all Union armies. Finally, Lincoln has found his general. Grant is short, unprepossessing, a former failed businessman who resigned from the army in disgrace years earlier, rumors of drinking following him. But he fights. At Fort Donelson, when asked for terms, he replied, "No terms, except unconditional and immediate surrender." At Vicksburg, he laid siege until the city starved. At Chattanooga, he broke a Confederate stranglehold thought unbreakable. He wins battles, and Lincoln needs victories. Grant's strategy is brutally simple. Apply pressure everywhere simultaneously. General William Tecumseh Sherman will drive through Georgia toward Atlanta. General Philip Sheridan will devastate the Shenandoah Valley. And Grant himself will pursue Lee relentlessly in Virginia, accepting terrible casualties, never letting the Confederate Army rest or regroup. It is a war of attrition now, and the North can afford it. The North has more men, more factories, more railroads, more everything. The South's only hope has been to outlast Northern will. Grant intends to grind that hope into dust. The spring and summer of 1864 become a nightmare of blood. The Wilderness, Spotsylvania Courthouse, Cold Harbor, battles that produce casualty lists so horrific that Northern newspapers call Grant the Butcher. In 1 month, May 1864, the Army of the Potomac suffers 55,000 casualties. At Cold Harbor, Grant orders a frontal assault that kills 7,000 Union soldiers in less than an hour, many of them pinning their names to their uniforms so their bodies can be identified. Lincoln reads the casualty reports and feels each death as a personal weight. But he supports Grant. This is what winning requires. Meanwhile, Lincoln faces re-election. In August 1864, he is certain he will lose. The war drags on, the casualties mount, and the Democrats have nominated George McClellan, who promises a negotiated peace. Lincoln writes a secret memorandum. It seems exceedingly probable that this administration will not be re-elected. Then it will be my duty to so cooperate with the president-elect as to save the Union between the election and the inauguration. Then, on September 2nd, Sherman captures Atlanta. The news electrifies the North. The Confederacy is crumbling. Sheridan drives Confederate forces from the Shenandoah Valley, destroying everything of military value, leaving the valley so devastated that, as he reports, a crow flying over would have to carry its own rations. Lincoln wins re-election decisively, carrying every state but 3. On March 4, 1865, he delivers his second inaugural address, just 703 words, one of the shortest and most profound in American history. He speaks of the war's meaning, God's purposes, the shared guilt of North and South for the sin of slavery, and he ends with words of reconciliation. With malice toward none, with charity for all, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds. 3 weeks later, Grant breaks Lee's lines at Petersburg. Richmond, the Confederate capital, falls on April 3rd. Lee retreats westward, his army starving, disintegrating. On April 9, 1865, at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, Lee surrenders to Grant. The terms are generous. Confederate soldiers can go home, keep their horses for spring planting. Officers keep their sidearms. The war is over. Abraham Lincoln has 5 days left to live. Chapter 16. Our American Cousin, April 14th, 1865. Good Friday. Abraham Lincoln wakes in a mood his staff has rarely seen, almost buoyant. The war is won. Lee has surrendered 5 days ago. Richmond is in Union hands. The killing is over. At the morning cabinet meeting, Lincoln describes a recurring dream he has had. He is in a boat moving toward a distant shore. He has had this dream before every major victory. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, practical and skeptical, dismisses it. But Lincoln seems to find meaning in it. He spends the afternoon handling routine business. He signs a pardon for a deserter. He has signed hundreds of such pardons throughout the war, unable to bear executing boys who ran from battle. He discusses Reconstruction policy with his cabinet. He takes a carriage ride with Mary, and she later remembers he seemed happier than he has been in years. We must both be more cheerful in the future, he tells her. Between the war and the loss of our darling Willie, we have been very miserable. That evening, they plan to attend Ford's Theater. The play is Our American Cousin, a popular comedy. Lincoln is not particularly interested, but Mary wants to go, and General Ulysses S. Grant and his wife have agreed to join them. It will be a public celebration of victory. But that afternoon, Grant sends his regrets. He and Mrs. Grant must travel to New Jersey to visit their children. Lincoln and Mary invite Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris, instead. The president's bodyguard, John Parker, is assigned to protect him. Ford's Theater stands on 10th Street, a 3-story brick building. The presidential box is draped with American flags and a Treasury Guard banner. Lincoln arrives late, around 8:30 p.m., and the performance stops, while the orchestra plays Hail to the Chief. The audience of about 1,700 people applauds. Lincoln bows, takes his seat in a rocking chair positioned in the box. The play resumes. It is light, silly, full of jokes about Americans and Europeans. Lincoln laughs. For a few hours, he is just a man watching a play with his wife. John Parker, the bodyguard, grows bored. Around 10 p.m., he leaves his post outside the presidential box and goes downstairs, possibly to the nearby tavern for a drink. The box is unguarded. John Wilkes Booth has been in and out of Ford's Theater all day. He is a famous actor, 26 years old, from a prominent theatrical family. His brother Edwin is the most celebrated Shakespearean actor in America. John is handsome, charismatic, a matinee idol. He is also a Confederate sympathizer who has come to hate Lincoln with passionate intensity. Booth learned this morning that Lincoln would attend the theater tonight. He has spent the day preparing. He knows Ford's Theater intimately, has performed here dozens of times, knows every corridor and passage. He has arranged an escape route, a horse waiting in the alley. He has recruited accomplices. Lewis Powell will assassinate Secretary of State William Seward. George Atzerodt will kill Vice President Andrew Johnson. They will decapitate the Union government in a single night. At approximately 10:15 p.m., during the play's third act, Booth enters the vestibule behind the presidential box. The door is unlocked. No guard stands watch. He opens the outer door silently, then the inner door to the box itself. Lincoln is perhaps 6 feet away, watching the play. Mary sits beside him, her hand in his. Rathbone and Harris sit to their left. Booth raises a single-shot .44 caliber Derringer pistol and fires once, point blank, into the back of Lincoln's head. The bullet enters behind the left ear, tears through the brain, lodges behind the right eye. Lincoln slumps forward. Mary screams. Rathbone leaps toward Booth, who pulls a knife and slashes Rathbone's arm nearly to the bone. Booth vaults over the railing of the box. It is only 11 feet to the stage, but his spur catches on the Treasury Guard banner. He lands awkwardly, breaking his left leg. He rises, faces the audience, and shouts, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants, Virginia's state motto. Some witnesses later claim he also shouts, "The South is avenged." Then he limps across the stage and disappears through the back of the theater. The audience sits frozen for a moment, uncertain whether this is part of the play. Then chaos erupts. Soldiers carry Lincoln across 10th Street to the Peterson House, a boarding house directly opposite the theater. They lay him diagonally across a bed in a first-floor room. He is too tall to fit lengthwise. Doctors arrive quickly, but can do nothing. The bullet has destroyed too much brain tissue. Mary weeps beside the bed. Lincoln's breathing is labored, irregular. Members of the cabinet arrive, Stanton, Wells, others, and keep vigil through the long night. Lincoln never regains consciousness. His strong heart continues beating on and on through the dark hours. At 7:22 a.m. on April 15, 1865, Abraham Lincoln dies. Edwin Stanton, tears streaming down his face, speaks into the silence. Now he belongs to the ages. Chapter 17. The Funeral Train. April 19, 1865, Washington, D.C. Abraham Lincoln's body lies in state in the East Room of the White House in a black-draped catafalque beneath the crystal chandeliers. 60,000 mourners file past over 2 days. Many weep openly. Some reach out to touch the coffin. The nation is in shock, grief turning to rage, rage to a kind of stunned disbelief. The funeral procession moves through Washington's streets on a gray, drizzly morning. 6 white horses pull the hearse. Behind it, a riderless horse, boots reversed in the stirrups, the ancient symbol of a fallen leader. Behind that, regiments of soldiers, freed African Americans in mourning clothes, government officials, foreign dignitaries, ordinary citizens by the thousands. Then Lincoln begins his final journey home. The funeral train leaves Washington on April 21st, retracing the route Lincoln took to his inauguration 4 years earlier, but in reverse, heading back to Springfield. The train carries Lincoln's coffin and the smaller coffin of his son Willie, whose body has been exhumed to travel with his father. 12 days, 7 states, 1,654 miles. At every stop, Baltimore, Harrisburg, Philadelphia, New York, Albany, Buffalo, Cleveland, Columbus, Indianapolis, Chicago, the coffin is removed and displayed in state capitals, city halls, public squares. Tens of thousands gather at each stop. In Philadelphia, 300,000 people file past the open casket. In New York, 500,000 line the streets. In Chicago, 125,000 mourners wait hours in the rain to pay respects. Between cities, the train moves slowly through the countryside, especially at night. People build bonfires along the tracks, stand in fields and forests and town squares as the train passes. They sing hymns. They hold torches. Children wave small flags. In some places, entire communities gather at rural crossings just to watch the funeral car go by. The train reaches Springfield on May 3rd. The city Lincoln left 4 years ago, with hope and fear, now receives him back in mourning. His body lies in state in the Capitol building he knew so well, where he practiced law, where he delivered the House-divided speech. On May 4th, 1865, a warm spring day, the funeral procession moves through Springfield. Bishop Matthew Simpson delivers the eulogy. Then the coffins of Abraham and Willie Lincoln are placed in a temporary vault at Oak Ridge Cemetery, 2 miles outside town, on a wooded hillside. Mary Todd Lincoln, devastated beyond measure, does not attend. She has remained in the White House, taking to her bed, unable to function. She has now lost 3 of her 4 sons, Eddie, Willie, and, in a sense, Abraham, who was husband, but also the focus of all her fierce ambition. She will never fully recover, will spend her remaining years haunted, unstable, eventually committed briefly to an asylum by her son Robert before being released. Robert Todd Lincoln, the only surviving son, becomes the keeper of his father's legacy and the protector of his grieving mother. He will live until 1926, the last direct link to Abraham Lincoln. The nation begins the long work of grieving. Church bells toll. Buildings are draped in black. Photographs of Lincoln appear in windows across the North. The funeral is over, but the reckoning has just begun. Chapter 18. The Conspirators and the Reckoning. April 26, 1865. A tobacco barn near Port Royal, Virginia. 2 weeks after assassinating Abraham Lincoln, John Wilkes Booth is cornered. He has been running since that night at Ford's Theater, his broken leg throbbing with every step. He fled Washington with accomplice David Harold, crossing the Navy Yard Bridge into Maryland. Around midnight on April 14th, they stopped at Mary Surratt's Tavern in Surrattsville to retrieve weapons and supplies hidden there earlier. Then on to the home of Dr. Samuel Mudd, who splinted Booth's fractured leg, the injury from his leap to the stage. For days, Booth and Harold hid in a thicket of trees near the Zekiah Swamp in southern Maryland, aided by Confederate sympathizers who brought food and news. Booth kept a diary, writing with growing incredulity about the nation's reaction. He expected to be hailed as a hero, the man who struck down a tyrant. Instead, even the Southern newspapers condemned him. "I struck boldly and not as the papers say," he wrote. "I can never repent it." They crossed the Potomac River into Virginia on April 23rd, then made their way to Richard Garrett's farm. Garrett, not knowing who they were, offered them shelter. But the manhunt was massive. 10,000 federal troops, detectives, and police scouring the countryside, driven by a $100,000 reward. On April 26th, 26 soldiers of the 16th New York Cavalry Regiment surrounded Garrett's tobacco barn where Booth and Harold were sleeping. "We know who you are," Lieutenant Edward Dougherty called out. "Surrender or we'll burn the barn." Harold stumbled out, hands raised, terrified. Booth refused. The soldiers set the barn ablaze. Through gaps in the burning walls, they could see Booth silhouetted by flames, hobbling on his crutch, holding a carbine. Then Sergeant Boston Corbett, acting against orders, he later claimed divine inspiration, fired a single shot through the gap. The bullet struck Booth in the neck, severing his spinal cord. Soldiers dragged him from the burning barn. He was paralyzed, dying. "Tell my mother I died for my country," he whispered. He asked them to lift his hands so he could see them. Looking at his paralyzed hands, he murmured, "Useless, useless." At dawn, John Wilkes Booth died. He was 26 years old. Meanwhile, the other conspirators had been captured. Lewis Powell had attacked Secretary of State William Seward in his home on the night of April 14th, stabbing him repeatedly before fleeing. Seward survived, though badly wounded. Powell was arrested 3 days later, hiding at Mary Surratt's boarding house. George Atzerodt had lost his nerve, never attempting to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson, but was captured within days. David Harold was now in custody. Dr. Samuel Mudd, who insisted he didn't know he was treating Lincoln's assassin, was arrested. So was Mary Surratt, whose boarding house had served as a meeting place for the conspirators. The trial began on May 9, 1865, in a third-floor room of the old Arsenal Penitentiary, now Fort McNair. 8 defendants faced a military tribunal: Powell, Harold, Atzerodt, Mary Surratt, Mudd, Michael O'Laughlin, Samuel Arnold, and Edmund Spangler. The nation watched closely. The evidence was overwhelming for Powell, Harold, and Atzerodt. They had clearly conspired to murder government officials. Mary Surratt's guilt was less certain. Her boarding house had hosted the conspirators, but had she known about the assassination plot? Or had she merely known about the earlier kidnapping scheme? The tribunal was not convinced of her innocence. On June 30th, the verdicts were announced. 4 were sentenced to death: Powell, Harold, Atzerodt, and Mary Surratt. Mudd, O'Laughlin, and Arnold received life imprisonment. Spangler received 6 years. On July 7, 1865, on a blazingly hot day, scaffolding was erected in the prison courtyard. The 4 condemned were led to the gallows, hoods placed over their heads, nooses around their necks. Mary Surratt became the first woman executed by the United States federal government. She maintained her innocence to the end. Whether justice was truly served remains debated to this day. John Surratt, Mary's son and a key conspirator, escaped to Europe and was not captured until 1866. His trial ended in a hung jury. He was never retried. The conspirators were dead or imprisoned. But the questions lingered. Was this truly just a handful of fanatics? Or had there been a larger Confederate conspiracy? The answers died with Booth in a burning Virginia barn. Abraham Lincoln lived 56 years and 39 days. Born in a dirt-floor Kentucky cabin to parents who could not read, he died in the finest house in America, having saved the Union and begun the end of slavery. What did he accomplish? He preserved the nation through 4 years of apocalyptic war that killed 620,000 Americans. He issued the Emancipation Proclamation, imperfect, limited, but real. He signed the Homestead Act, giving land to millions, though Native Americans paid the price. He chartered the Transcontinental Railroad, created the Department of Agriculture, established land-grant colleges. At Gettysburg, he redefined American democracy itself with 272 words that still echo. What didn't he do? He didn't live to shape Reconstruction, to ensure that freedom meant equality. The 13th Amendment abolishing slavery was ratified 8 months after his death. His hope for malice toward none, with charity for all, was betrayed by the vengeful years that followed. African Americans won freedom but not justice. That struggle continues still. We remember him as the great emancipator. But historians debate whether he truly believed in racial equality or merely made pragmatic choices. We'll never know. What we know, a boy who taught himself to read by firelight became a man who found words for democracy's highest ideals and held a shattering nation together through sheer will. Nearly 160 years later, we still live in the nation Lincoln saved and wrestle with the problems he couldn't solve. His legacy is both triumph and unfinished business, perhaps fitting for a man who said, "I do the very best I know how, and I mean to keep doing so until the end." And now, as Lincoln's story settles around you like evening mist over the Sangamon River, let yourself drift toward sleep. Tomorrow brings its own challenges, but tonight, rest knowing that even in darkness, ordinary people can rise to meet extraordinary times. Sweet dreams, and we'll meet again soon for another story.